This is a Honda S500. You know, they only officially made this car for 1 year, but reports state that they were handing them out before the official release date and no one really knows how many were actually made. It's estimated they made around 500. Pretty interesting, but that follows on from our lack of info from the Mazda 360. They actually made an S360 for about 5 minutes before they scrapped that idea. Believe it or not, the Honda S500 had a 4-cylinder double overhead cam, 531cc engine making 44 horsepower. But enough about that. It's not K. This is the Honda S600, apparently the first Asian-made 4-wheeled vehicle to be exported to West Germany. The more you know. With its 606cc water-cooled double overhead cam, quad carb, and isometric exhaust manifold, it produced 57 horsepower through a chain-driven rear axle. It's really just an S500 with a different face and engine though. And like the S500, it seems as though no one really knows how many were produced. But enough about that, that's not K either. The Fiat 500 F65 and 68, the Fiat 500L 69, the Fiat 500R 72. Not a single one of them is K, despite fitting the regulation size and engine requirements. Okay, so what makes a K car? Well, that's simple. The English Wikipedia says that it's the Japanese vehicle category for the smallest highway legal passenger cars. The Japanese Wikipedia says that it's the Japanese automobile classification according to the current road transport vehicle law. That law says that as of October 1998, to receive K car certification, you require an engine below 660 cc's and vehicle dimensions equal to or less than 340 centimeters in length, 148 centimeters in width, and a max height of 200 centimeters. And if even one of these conditions is exceeded, the car will be treated as a small vehicle, not a K vehicle. Now I know what you're about to write in the comments. What about the 64 horsepower limit? The English Wikipedia says that on January 1st, 1990, a K engine must not exceed 64 horsepower. That's false. The 64 horsepower thing has been drilled into K enthusiasts. I can't find the source, but let's put that myth to rest. The 64 horsepower limit is actually nothing more than a gentleman's agreement between manufacturers and nothing to do with K regulations at all. In the early to mid 80s, manufacturers are pushing to have the title of most powerful K car. This intensified until 1987 when the 550cc F5A driven Suzuki Alto Works achieved 64 horsepower. The manufacturers got together and agreed that 64 horsepower would be the limit, and this ended the horsepower arms race. I will note that some of them kinda cheated, and it has been reported that simply improving the exhaust systems on some of these cars could net you up to 26 horsepower. Perhaps some of you are not convinced. On April 1st, 2014, Caterham released the 7160 in Japan. Your classic Caterham shape, but shrunk to within K size and fitted with a 660cc K6A engine from a Suzuki Jimny, and that smacked out a hair-raising 80 horsepower. In November 2017, they released the Super Sprint version with 96 horsepower. In 2021, they released the 170S and 170R using the Suzuki R06A engine and putting out 85 horsepower. They are all K. All of this has been confirmed either with phone calls or in person at the transport department. So back to the S500. It's less than 3,400 millimeters in length? Check. It's less than 1,480 millimeters in width? Check. Less than 2,000 millimeters in height? Check. Displacement less than 660 cc's? Check. So why oh why is the S500 not a K car? That's because K classification is judged in the year of manufacture, and the S500 was produced between October 1963 and February 1964. The K car classification wasn't increased to 660cc until January 1990. A perfect example of how this system works is the Fiat 126, aka the Zastava 126, aka the FSM Niki, and a couple of other things I can't pronounce. It was manufactured between 1972 and 2000. It has the correct dimension and was available with the correct engine capacity. If you import a 1989 model, it will be a small car and not a K car. If you import a 90 model or later with the 652cc engine in it, it will be a K car. But if you're thinking of doing it, be careful, because one source said that only the 91 would be accepted. I couldn't find a clear answer of when the 126 stopped having the 652cc the engine in it, so maybe that was the end of 91, but yeah. Here are some examples of cars that are mistakenly called K just because they're small. Some will argue it's close enough, or it's the same thing, or I consider it K. Oh look, a Ferrari. Oh, I consider it a Ferrari. Yeah, well you try telling that to the transport department, or a used car dealership. K is a Japanese automobile classification according to the current road transport vehicle law. The Japanese transport department decides what is K and what isn't, and they're very clear on this. The fact is, if you can't get that beautiful little yellow license plate from the Japanese transport department, then it isn't K. What about electric cars? Yes! The Mitsubishi Innovative Electric Vehicle is one example of an electric K car. Any car meeting the specifications can be K. The Smart K is an especially interesting example, but we won't go into that in this video. Modifying K cars is where it sometimes becomes a grey zone. If you're into K cars, you will know what this is. But for those that don't, this is called a cappuccino. Undisputed K car royalty, and for various reasons, people love to modify them. You could, in theory, put that 80 horsepower Caterham engine that I mentioned earlier into this thing and it would still be K. Motor swaps are possible within the 660cc limit, but paperwork is required. However, if you increase the engine capacity above 660cc or swap in a Hayabusa engine, for example, it would no longer be K. The increased engine capacity in the stock engine is kind of a grey area because technically, as long as the emissions were on point, the transport department would never know what you'd done. However, it is possible that the shop carrying out the work for you might inform the transport department on your behalf. Some manufacturers won't even sell you oversized pistons unless you sign a document stating that you won't use them on the road. Another thing to consider is that if you like driving your car around a track, you could no longer compete with your K-car friends on a level playing field. Over fenders are a grey area also because they can be removed for the 2-yearly inspection very easily, so some enthusiasts have been known to drive wider cars and just make them narrower for the inspection. This kind of flippy-floppy swapperoo could also be done with an engine too, I suppose, but who would? It really is a strict car category with limitations of modifications extending to width, length, and height, even within the max spec. If you change the overall height of the vehicle beyond 4 centimeters, even if you haven't gone over the 2-meter limit, you require a bunch of paperwork to continue driving it. For example, you know the guard that's on the back wall of a K truck? By simply removing that on some models, you're no longer able to register it without additional paperwork. Fun fact, it's called a torii, and the bits that stick up are actually called nekomimi. Going off all the information that we've learned, it should be pretty clear that the UKDM cappuccino is indeed K. But I asked a specific question anyway. I couldn't get a guarantee that every prefecture would accept it as K, but inside Japan, at the time of asking, it would be possible to register that as a K car. The specifics of that I didn't follow up on, but it's absolutely possible to do. I know you want me to talk more about this car, but we'll talk about it in a later episode, so make sure you subscribe.